What is up, everybody? My name is James DeFiore, and this is Blackball. Okay, we tried to do this the other night, but we had some technical difficulties, but now the man is here. He was recently acquitted on harassment charges stemming from letters and emails that he sent to members of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. Now, his case, and I'll just read the headline here for those listening: Leeds man who labeled church a cult not guilty of harassing members, whose accusations were an exercise in pearl clutching. A Leeds man has been found not guilty of harassing members of a church who he sent letters and emails to stating that they were part of a cult. If you've watched this show before, you know that this man is correct, that the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church is not just a cult, but an abusive one. And here to talk about that is the man himself, and his name is Lance Christie. Lance, how are you, buddy?
I'm good. Very privileged to be on your show.
Thank you very much. It's nice to finally have you. Thank you, by the way, also for everything that you've done in your fight against the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. I know it wasn't an easy one. I know it was a long fight. But I can tell you firsthand that I have had people message me, people that are still in and people that are out, saying the same thing that you said to me the other day, which was that this is a watershed moment when it comes to the life cycle of the cult and people that are trying to get out. Can you give me your thoughts now that you're a couple days out of the acquittal?
Well, if I can just say, it has been a massive battle to get anyone inside to listen to me in any shape or form. When I was going under the last 2.5 years in the church were very difficult while I was being rebuked and subject to 27 priestly visits, but it was all one-way traffic. And it was a wonderful experience in court that the judge took my letters that I've been writing in to the brethren seriously. He was and then my barrister was actually going through my letters line by line, my emails as well, reading them out in court and asking the brethren who were witnessing against me where the harassment was, where was the offence, where was this hatred that I was accused of, and they couldn't put the finger on anything. They said, well, I can't find anything right now, for instance. So it was quite an exposure, really, that whilst they were accusing me of leading a campaign even against the brethren, you've just used the word a fight. Well, I'm actually a very placid, calm sort of guy, and I take my inspiration from Christ. You know, it's his spirit in, it says in Peter, doesn't it, that when reviled, he reviled not again. When suffering, threatened not, but handed himself over into the hands of him who judges righteously. And I felt, as it was established that I hadn't been threatening the brethren in court, that we felt that the Spirit of Christ, you might say, which just hands over, look, I'm just a sinner saved by grace, but I take my inspiration for Christ, and I was actually handing myself over to the judiciary, the British judiciary system. And there was the judge happened to be a Jew. His name was Capstick, and he was very fair, very balanced, and he couldn't quite understand why the brethren in the dock couldn't answer straight questions with straight answers. For instance, he asked Neil Christie about Bruce Hales, and he literally wriggled and squirmed because he didn't want to tell the judge that Bruce was the leader. One of the leaders, or a senior leader, came out of his mouth, and a few things, and you can see the judge getting more and more frustrated because he would not answer a straight question. But hey, he's too young to be in such a position as Neil. He was coordinating all the witnesses, apparently, for the brethren, and he just hasn't got the experience for standing court successfully. So apart from everything else, and anyway, I hope that helps you to understand.
Yeah, no, of course. I was kind of curious during the court case, because I didn't read any transcripts or anything. I don't even know if they're available, but I was wondering if your lawyer and you discussed asking questions that where the answers would reveal that this group is a cult. For example, if you asked a witness, one of the 8 people did they all take the stand, by the way?
I think 2. Yes, there were 2 dropped out. No, 2 dropped out. John West of Daster and Duncan Hulbert of Knaresborough. They were fairly close to where I am, which I took as a sign that perhaps their consciences were smited to them, or whatever. I don't know, but I do know those guys. I've been friends with them all my life, and it may be that they did something struck them as to whether it was right to be witnessing against an ex-brother like the others were doing. I don't know, but I can't. It was quite interesting. The whole case kind of turned on motive. And that is really what Christians do. They check their motives. Good people, especially if you're hurting somebody, you've got to check yourself. If you're saying something that is needful but hurts people, you've got to check yourself 100 times as to whether you're doing it out of any spite or vindictiveness,
malice,
or whether you've got the ultimate good of the person at your heart. And so I'm an inside-out man. I don't claim anything, but whereas you, not being a Christian, would say the center of your heart probably is yourself, and I support that, because we want you to develop as a person, as we want everyone to develop as a person. So the more James Di Fiore is James Di Fiore, the happier we are. So the more that Lance is Lance, the happier we are. But you see, I attribute all that to Christ. So if Christ is in my heart, I radiate out the goodness that Christ, in measure, of course, a very, very small measure, the goodness that Christ radiated out when he was on earth. And it's up to those that meet you to decide whether they're inspired by that, or whether they're frightened by it, or take it or leave it, or whatever you want. But as shining a light into dark places, that's what Christ does. And that's what he exhorts, Paul the Apostle exhorted us to do in Ephesians 5 and 6, that if there's something a bit murky or dark, you shine a light, and that exposes motives, you see. And then if the motive is you hold yourself accountable and say, yeah, I'm Lance. As Charlie Ward, who's got 27 million followers, wrote a book, I'm Just Charlie. Well, he's Charlie, a great guy. And so you're just James. Richard's Richard. And Richard, whereas he's been clamped down and crushed through restraint orders and all sorts of other nonsense, terrible stuff for years, he's now blossoming into the real Richard, and we all love it,
Yeah, I love Richard. Richard is one of my favorite people. I talk to him all the time, and he's wonderful. I just wanted to.
I just want to say, I challenge religion if it's there to restrict people and crush personality. I challenge it. I do not think Christ was a healer. He went around healing people, setting them up so that they could be healers and go out and take the glad tidings. So these people that use religion to control people and control their minds and crush their personalities are not in the spirit of Christ.
Yeah, I always have a real hard time when people weaponize faith. I just, they use their faith against them, and they use it to profit. Well, before we get to that, and though, I want to just get back to your case for a second and ask you, and this might be a difficult question to answer because for obvious reasons, but you had family members that were part of their witness list. And I was wondering how that made you feel when you saw them and heard them on the stand.
Well, can I just say that Josh, who's my fifth child and third boy, answered the most straightforwardly of any of the witnesses. He was clearly frightened. I'm sorry, Josh. I hope he'll be listening to this. I hope the brethren don't restrict the brethren. I hope there's no punishment if any brethren, inside brethren, listen to this, because that would be awful, wouldn't it? We're actually talking about a public court hearing. And really, if there's any effort by any of the brethren to prevent the brethren hearing what the world has got access to my mind, that would be very serious. But I would say that my son, Josh, despite being frightened, was the most respectful to the judge, answered as accurate as he could, and consequently helped in the summing up. Now, he may not like to hear that, but I believe he and I are trying to be honest in our different situations. And we've got this big difference in that I'm regarded as not being good enough to be one of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, too evil, so they've had to withdraw from me, but he is perfectly good enough. And consequently, he was right opposite me. So I commend my son Josh for doing the best he could in a very, very, very difficult situation. To be thrust into an arena where you're witnessing against your own father is a very challenging situation for anybody. And it does raise serious questions as to who's supposed him to be in that situation. With regard to Jed, my eldest son, who has always been my pride and joy, I mean, Deb and I were delighted when he was born, and he was a bundle of energy. And he really did imbibe the Spirit of Christ in his younger days, and was magnificent at the time of his accident, and came through attributing the fact his life was saved to God's ways and using scriptures like all things work together for good to those that love God. So he was sustained amazingly through the most difficult suffering. And but to be honest, when I was listening and watching him in court, and he was a different Jed. He's changed completely from what he was. So I'm appealing to him really to think back to his boyhood and teenage days and decide whether what's happened to him since he left home and left my area of control, or not, I didn't control it, my influence. The father has a certain influence over his household. What's happened, and whether he's a better person today than he was when he was in my household, or whether he's become a bit of somebody else, a different personality, for whatever reason. So I'll try to answer that carefully, James.
No, of course. I imagined being you in that courtroom. this morning when I knew you were coming on. I just wanted to see if I could sort of summon the type of emotions, even if I had to manufacture sort of a guesswork game of how you might feel. And the only thing that kept on reoccurring to me was whether or not you had made eye contact with your sons.
Well, what, sir? I didn't quite hear that.
Whether or not you had made eye contact with your sons.
Yes, just fleetingly, but I didn't notice them returning. I think they were probably embarrassed, and I would hope they would be, because it's the most unusual thing to speak about out against your father, especially in view of Scripture. Honouring thy father and mother is the first promise, the first commandment with a promise, and of course they're honouring their mother. I suppose they're happy about that. But you see, I had the same thing, so I'm empathetic with them, because in 1972 my father was shoved out in very, very similar circumstances, although the reasons for the withdrawal are different. Apparently it came out in court I was withdrawn from because I'm a heretic. Well, my father was withdrawn from for the spirit of lying. The spirit of lying. So in 1998, I rang Bruce Hales. He was staying with David Bill, a top guy in New Zealand, one we all loved. And Bruce was sat by him, and David Bill was speaking to you on the phone. And I just said, look, my father was withdrawn from for the spirit of lying. And I couldn't quite understand what that charge was. So about 5 years later, Bruce Hales came to take 3-day meetings in Leeds, and one of his henchmen called Phil McNaughton, Gareth Hales' father-in-law, stayed with us. And he just gave me a message: Bruce Hales can't understand the basis on which your father was withdrawn from. So about a couple of years later, it was cleared in the Leeds Assembly that my father had been withdrawn from wrongly. So, but he died by then. And then they said my mother had been withdrawn from wrongly. She died too. So now we've got a situation, the next generation down, where I'm actually having, it's a bit late if they come to it that they shouldn't have withdrawn from me after I've died. And my father, actually, it's sobering to consider that my father died at the same age as I am now. It was just broken. I mean, we had a doctor in those days. We had doctors. There's a wonderful local doctor called Dr. Burrows, one of the best. And he's died since I left, and nobody told me. I saw his gravestone in the cemetery. So I had a photograph taken of me but the Brethren don't. He was one of my best friends in the Brethren. They didn't even have the decency to phone me or send me a note to say Dr. Burrows has been taken. And so you go and see the graves of people I used to love. And Dr. Burrows said about my father, one of the last times I went to see him, he said, I think he's got a deep depression. I think he was absolutely right. He came in to the Brethren in 1950, bright as a button, freshly converted, preached wonderfully. In 1950, when things were far better in the Brethren system, far, far, far better, and then thrust out less than a year after we had the leader, Symington, to stay, and James Taylor III, and then he did a video, Doctrine That Divides, which is on YouTube, with my mother in 1974, I think it was. I think he did it in 73. It was shown in 74. And then towards the end of his life, John Hales gave us a license to have a little bit to do with him. He was just wrecked, and it wasn't just all the words they used, and they couldn't really diagnose anything. It was the man had brought his own parents into fellowship, and then they'd been chucked out in the 60s, late 60s. Then he'd been chucked out in 72. My mother had. The family was broken up. Garth and I were in, Ralph and Cedric out. The consequences of breaking up families are massive. Yeah. They're shockingly massive. They're emotionally destroying. And so my father tried to come back 6 months after he was withdrawn from, obviously to save the family unit, bless him. He humbled him enough to ask Oliver Smaldon, the local lead, whether he could come back. Yeah. Smaldon asked Simonton, and whenever I asked Smaldon about it, he said Simon just spat on the ground and said he hasn't broken his link with Leslie Turner of Doncaster, and one of the witnesses was from Doncaster, therefore he can't come back. Well, I suppose they would do the same about me now. I suppose if my son went to the leader at Bruce Hales and asked whether Lance could come back, he may not spit on the ground, but I don't know whether he would say he'd find anything complimentary to say about me, which might count him a favour. I don't know whether he'd find that in his heart or not. But I'm only Lance.
Yeah. Well, also, if Bruce Hales spit on the ground, that was probably just food flying out of his mouth. So
it wasn't Bruce Hales; it was Mr. Simonton that spat on the ground.
All right. Well, thanks for stepping on my punchline.
Whenever I asked Gordon about my father coming back, he cited that. You see, no chance, mate, because Simonton has pronounced.
I'm going to welcome Richard to the show in a moment. I just wanted to say quickly, though, because Richard, actually, I'll just welcome Richard Marsh. There you are, buddy. How you doing, Richard?
I'm good, thanks.
Before we get to you, I just want to. I was thinking about this the other day as well. In the United States, where there were generations and generations of trauma leveled against certain groups, specifically African Americans, they talk about something called generational trauma. And while I am certainly not comparing the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church with the institution of slavery in the States, I still think that the PBCC is sort of a microcosmic example of the type of generational trauma that you can do to individual families. And you two are kind of the, unfortunately, the perfect poster boys for this kind of thing. That to me is the number one sin that I can think of this cult, is the damage that they do to immediate families. Richard, can I get your thoughts on that? And then maybe you can pivot into how important you think Lance's case was in Leeds.
Sure. No, it absolutely, there is a generational trauma. And we had someone on our Get a Life podcast, Jen Hope, who had never been in the Brethren, but her father had. And she was traumatized by her father's experience. And so it, affected her childhood because she had no grandparents as a result of her father having been kicked out of the Brethren. Plus, she had to cope with her father's alcoholism, which was also derived with his attempt to cope with the mental trauma of having been pushed out of the Brethren. So it absolutely does affect people who've never even been in the Brethren, who are the next generation, and potentially it could go further than that. So you're absolutely right there. A closer approximation, you can't really compare the Brethren system quite to slavery, but it's very, very close to the kind of apartheid system in South Africa and the kind of effective apartheid that was the USA after slavery was abolished. There's a lot of parallels with apartheid.
Okay. And now Lance's case. Tell me about how that made you feel, because I know that you were really excited. You were talking to me about this case months ago. So was it a watershed moment? And just give me your overall synopsis on that case.
Oh, absolutely. It's a watershed moment. It's hugely significant. And the reason is this, that it's now been publicly stated in court that the Brethren are malicious and vindictive. And it's been made very clear that they will gang together and conspire to try and criminalize former members. Now, in the past, they've done this and they have, to some extent, succeeded. There was the case of Ian Mackay and Peter Harrison, where they got a massive court case together and they confabulate all this supposed damage, and they actually succeed in basically silencing and gagging, as I say, ripping the guy's tongue out so he doesn't dare speak out again. Now, this time it's backfired hugely. And the the effect of it is that the next time, if the brethren are stupid enough, and they are, of course, stupid, if they're stupid enough to try this again, this case becomes a precedent and can be cited anywhere in the globe as irrefutable evidence of the malicious and vindictive nature of the brethren and of the way that they conspire and gang together to try and criminalize and shut up opposition. So it's much bigger than just this one case. This isn't just, this isn't just about Lance Christie. This is a victory for the whole ex-brethren community, and in fact, wider than that. There's the Jehovah's Witness, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who are fighting similar things. Millions of people around the globe need this good news. It's very, very significant. And I don't think they've succeeded in shutting Lance up. It would take a nuclear weapon to do that, as far as
and thank God, because Lance, you're delightful. I got to tell you, I enjoy talking to you because, listen, I enjoy talking to all the ex-members for various reasons. But the entertainment value of talking to Lance cannot be overstated. Yeah, there it is, right? The laugh and everything.
I don't think the brethren think that, because someone told me that meetings that I took, which I thought were in the gain of the Spirit of God, have been withdrawn or repudiated. So they've never told me, but if they were honest, they would come to me and say, Lance, you've said this wrong, doesn't agree with the doctrine. But to do it out of, because they hate me as a person, potentially, or don't like the words I speak, it doesn't seem fair. And especially when the meetings were generally good fun and people were joining in spontaneously. And I think the brethren have become far too controlled and somewhat regurgitated or whatever. They now, there's a lack of spontaneity. I think people are picked to give words or take readings or whatever you do, which kind of takes away, to my mind, I'd submit humbly, that liberty of the Spirit of God, which should mark a church that's free, because they've only got the best in mind for all, and the leader doesn't think for himself ever. He just wants the best for his flock. And that's how the body of Christ, the assembly, as you might call it, should function. So that there's never any arrogation of power. Or we were taught from boyhood that to actually promote yourself in the things of God is a very, very serious thing to do, and it constitutes a church sin. I mean, moral sins, if you fail sexually, that can be met easily because you confess your sins. He's faithful and righteous to forgive us our sins. But when it's pride and church sins, it's far more insidious and very difficult to dig down and get out, because the damage is generally widespread. So as reflecting what Paul teaches of the assembly, we would be humble and not extend ourselves in the things of God. But if people want to hear from you, you do your best. If people ask you to preach, you preach as fervently and point people to Christ as much as you can. And I'm not bothered whether you're an atheist or Jew, as long as you're honest. In that sense, I'd rather have an honest atheist than a fake Christian. I don't know what you'd say to that, Richard.
Well, I agree. One of the things I love about James is that he's very, very honest, and he will say the most dreadful things against himself, to his own hurt, in the interest of being honest. So,
brilliant.
That's one of the reasons I trust him, is that he doesn't make any attempt to hide his many flaws. It's all there on the table.
Well, perhaps
it really is.
Perhaps the brethren in Toronto would invite him in to preach.
It's right all right. How did you know that? I wanted to
get converted himself.
Yeah. I just
we're trying hard, James.
Yeah, I know. I was talking. That reminds me of a moment with ex-member Beth Seed, where she was talking about women's role in the Brethren and how, the table for 20 in the dining room, all the women would get up and then just like take all their shit to the kitchen to clean it up. And I asked her right at the end, my last question to her was, do you just leave your dishes lying around now just because you can? And she's like, yeah.
Well, what I'd say, I watched Beth. I thought she was beautifully honest. And this is what, if we're Christian, we're honest. And that simply means that we accept that we're sinners, we need a saviour, and you're attracted to Christ. But she was so openly going over all that had happened to her and how difficult it was. And your heart was just drawn to the young lass. And the Seeds were top people. Her ancestry, Wilbert Seed, was one of the top men in the Simonton regime who edited the ministry. So, as you said earlier about what's generational, I fear that at the time of Aberdeen, which I don't want to go into now, but it was a complete travesty of justice, to say the least, that at that point, people had to choose between Jim Taylor or leaving the position. There was no choice between Christ or Jim Taylor, because he had to be portrayed as Christ or Christ's representative. So despite the fact he'd been to bed naked with a naked woman, people had to choose for him or leave. And it came up just 2 days later, a week later. And so people couldn't understand, but they weren't allowed to exercise their own conscience, I don't believe. And that's really what I love about David Wallace, that his conscience wouldn't let him hand Richard over. And if it wasn't for David Wallace, we wouldn't have Richard here today. And you wouldn't be here. And I would be sad. So that man has stood in the breach and saved Richard's life. And I understand that some nasty legal people trying to go for him. Well, that's got to stop. I can't be here talking about my victory when David's under the cosh. And I'm sure you'd understand that, Richard. That man's my hero, because he may not look like a Plymouth brother, and he's got long hair, and he wouldn't exactly be invited in to preach. He might have to have a haircut or two before he went to.
He looks like his side hustle is modeling for romance novel covers. But yeah. We're trying to get David to come on as well. For those that are watching, I just put the GoFundMe link in the comments, and I'm just gonna keep that on the screen, I think, for the duration of the show. Lance,
can I just say something? There are three people who I think.
How could I possibly stop you, Lance? But go ahead.
Sorry.
No, please go ahead. Go ahead.
I would suggest that if any brethren are listening to this and they want any sort of justice or start any sort of move towards justice, there are three people that I think should protect David Wallace, because he's stated the truth. Okay? And shall I tell you what? I'd humbly suggest that those three people should be Brad Mitchell, Rod Diplock, and Mick Strange, because they were the Plymouth Brethren representatives who took responsibility for what was happening in Canada, for what was happening to David Wallace. Now, if they've got an ounce of moral fairness in them, they will see that they are responsible to protect David Wallace, because David Wallace, the truth stands inviolate. The truth, whether the truth hurts or makes you happy, is completely irrelevant. The truth stands, and the truth presides. Christ set out the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. And so truth matters, and truth should colour everything we do. So when brethren tell me to fall down in repentance and accept I'm wrong, well, that's secondary to what I'm falling down and submitting to. The truth is dominant always. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And listen, I know that it's funny how the media has pimped David Wallace's stories to the tune of dozens of articles. And we're talking from the CBC, Global, smaller outlets like Press Progress. But specifically, I want to point out Canada Land, because this is what I find egregious. And listen, Jesse Brown and I sort of get along now. You know, I don't hate anybody. We've had a past, and I think we're over it. But when I found out that the Ratfucker Pod series, first of all, would not exist, obviously, if it wasn't for David Wallace and the information that he gave. It's named after him, right? You know what I mean? Like, and the idea that when the lawsuit was launched by Shane and Edith Wenzel of Shane Homes, the developers in Calgary who allegedly had a role in the attempted ouster of a sitting mayor, Naheed Nenshi, in Calgary, when he was sued along with Canadaland, David Wallace, and I found out that Jesse Brown was not going to protect him as a protected source, even though all of the information that was making Ratfucker possible, which, by the way, was, I believe, the #1 downloaded podcast series in Canada in 2022, and he still wouldn't allow David to be absorbed inside the protection of his lawyers. I knew I was dealing with somebody that really is, not grateful when someone gives you the content that makes you money, right? That makes you more popular. But something even worse than that is that I think Jesse Brown's protecting his reputation. It's not the greatest one as it is, but he's protecting his reputation by not allowing himself to protect a guy who also has a bad reputation. Now, when you're a whistleblower and you're blowing the whistle on something that you were a part of, you're not saying that you've been a good lad your whole life. You're saying, I may have done some things, but once they told me to go and hand over a human being, aka Richard Marsh, to a cult, that was my red line, and I did not cross it. We all owe David. We all do.
Absolutely.
We owe David for the stories that have come out, for being that first domino that allowed the public, as minimal as it might feel right now in Canada, to even know what a Plymouth Brethren Christian Church is. And, and that's why I have the GoFundMe thing on the bottom of the page, because I David right now, by the way, has no money, has no ability to defend himself because he was the bus by people like Jesse Brown. And really, we are at a point now where the guy is sitting there. He doesn't have 2 pennies to put together. And why is he in that position? Because he couldn't bring himself to hand over a human being to a crazy cult. Listen, whatever his sins of the past might be, that I think makes up for it. And I'm with you, guys. I'm with you, Lance. I'm with you, Richard, because I know you feel the same way. That it's kind of an abomination. So maybe I can get your thoughts on that, Richard, and we'll pass over to Lance after that.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, everything hinged on David Wallace, and again, it was a sort of pivotal moment, a watershed moment in the whole history of ex-brethren and the kind of efforts that have been going on to make public how wicked this cult is, that one of their operatives actually turns around and spills the beans on them. I mean, that hasn't happened before to anything like that extent. I mean, I'm still sitting on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails from the likes of Brad Mitchell and Gerald Shipper and all these people. I haven't published them yet, and they will get published. But this is completely unprecedented. I mean, that never happened before. So we've got a huge gratitude for David, and at the moment he's experiencing a feeling that both Lance and I are very familiar with, and that is being on the wrong end of a lawsuit, and you get all these letters in threatening legal language, and regardless of how ridiculous the lawsuit may appear to be to the public eye, the fact is it's a very distressing, it's a very unsettling position to be in. And these people can do you real damage. Even if they didn't win the suit, you're still left with huge legal costs. So David absolutely does need our help at the moment.
And just to help you understand, you were telling the story of my assault outside Bruce Hales' house by his son Gareth. What you didn't follow on to say was, what you did say was that Rowan Scott hadn't taken up the matter, but he did. He went straight to the police, and I went with him, and we put a report in to the police. So things weren't looking too good for Gareth. So what happened was, it would seem that Charles Hales, I would assume with Bruce Hales, his father's authorization, reached out to a guy who had me to stay called Laurie Wearmouth in New Zealand. And Laurie Wearmouth conveyed to the Brethren, or to the police, I should say, and to the Brethren, must have conveyed to the Brethren, because the Brethren got hold of the story, that I was outside Bruce Hales' house to stake out the ground with a view to torching the house. And I had apparently said that I was going to put a cap, meaning a bullet, into his brain. Well, nothing. I've never done anything violent in all my life. And so what happened was then,
Lance, you just turned into Snoop Dogg for a second, but go ahead.
Then Charles Hales, I think he's the third or fourth son of Bruce Hales, had the temerity to raise a violence order against me, to criminalize me. And I learnt in court why he was trying to criminalize me. Because A, I can't travel as a criminal, but B, if I'd had a criminal record when I showed in the Leeds court this last week, they'd have used that against me, and the judge would have regarded me with a certain amount of suspicion, to say the least. So I can't see that Charles, who should be exemplary as the son of the man of God, had any motive for my good in trying to say that I was going to murder his father. He didn't quite say that, or burn the house to the ground. I mean, the judge described me. I've never heard language like this from the Brethren, but the judiciary, described me as a man of good character. Well, the Brethren regard me as the worst opposer. Apparently, Bruce Hales told the Brethren News as the worst opposer in the history of the recovery. I suppose that's back to Derby's day, 1828. Whereas the judge in 2023 is saying that I'm a man of good character. So I think the Brethren just need to keep to facts and really say why I'm a heretic. If they've withdrawn from me for being a heretic, they need to give me chapter and verse from the Bible, perhaps. And you've done something which means that you're against Christ or something. Well, bring it on, lads. Come on. Truth fears no investigation. Of course not. Yeah. I hold myself accountable. I've done that all my life to the Brethren. I used to say to my wife, people would come along and hurt us with an arbitrary command in the Brethren, but we would turn to each other and say, well, that's a bit tough.
Did you say bollocks? Did you say bollocks? You did.
Whenever I hurt somebody, said something that was hard, I would give my reasons, you see. So they would help them understand why I was saying something that might hurt them. But other people can hurt you and just walk away as though it's a command, And Garth would say, for instance, there's no hierarchy in the Brethren. Well, how can it came out in court that there was. So my brother Garth has just got to think again.
Lance,
maybe he is.
Lance, I'm wondering. I want to go
Sorry.
back to your case a bit for a second, because if I
Yeah.
was in your position, I would be instructing my lawyer, and maybe this proves that I'm naive, but I would be instructing my lawyer to ask as many questions as I could about the piety of Bruce Hales, about what shutting up is, about what those other terms that I'm still not familiar with, that like where you basically ostracize people, confinement or whatever it's called,
Yeah.
and the doctrine of separation, especially. I'm curious if your lawyer asked these witnesses for the other side questions
Yes.
the answers would clearly be either them perjuring themselves or them answering and indicating that this organization is in fact a cult.
Well, the witnesses, one of the witnesses was asked in court about rebuking and shutting up and withdrawal. And they just didn't seem to understand that that was a process that the brethren used. I was rebuked 3 times in full assembly. A letter was read out condemning me that Bruce Hales had written to me from Boston in October 2014. But when the brethren were asked about this, they kind of fudged it and didn't make it sound as though there was any real penalty or any judgment. But they were really dancing around the truth, because there clearly is. I mean, for me to be so seriously bad that they have to take my wife, my children, my grandchildren, my business, my whole social circle, the religion that I've been in all my life, money, I had to take 2 months to. The bank said that they had to freeze my money as though I was untrustworthy with money. I'd lent, there was loads of outstanding loans to brethren that I'd given interest-free to help them in their rainy days. But now I was so bad that I couldn't be trusted with money. So my son had to exercise a third-party mandate, which I'd apparently signed to in 2005, which said that he could take control of my money or have an influence on my money of some sort via the bank if there was any dispute between me and my wife. Well, that all came out when we looked into it. But you're a multimillionaire, and suddenly you're scratching around the seats, trying to reason via lawyers you couldn't afford and financial experts you couldn't afford with the brethren and your family to get some money out. And after a massive battle, pleading, I managed to get some money out. Well, how good is that? I call that financial abuse, because I thought I was quite safe in that religion. I was in a good religion, devoted, loyal, running a good business, successful, employing a lot of brethren, very, very good salaries. The non-brethren not quite so good, but I wasn't in control of the salaries. My son Jed was. And but I never thought that they would turn round and victimize me. It was a massive shock. It's like it's a miserable abuse, really.
I just want to point out that if me being able to access money depended on not having a dispute with my wife, I would be broke.
It's actually a very interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah,
go ahead, Richard. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, when I was with you, Lance, one time, you remember we met up with Nigel Devenish, and he had exactly the same experience. Nigel Devenish is another ex-Brethren member who was kicked out a little before Lance, I think. So when Nigel was also quite wealthy, he had quite a big business, and when he was kicked out the Brethren, he found his bank account frozen. Literally, his credit card wouldn't work, nothing. And he found that he had also signed a mandate giving his son third-party control over his bank account. And in both Lance's case and in Nigel Devenish's case, the way it had been done is that the son concerned had kind of slipped a pile of papers in front of them saying, "Hey, Dad, we need signatures on these." And both these guys had inadvertently signed away their rights to to control of their own bank accounts. And I'm quite certain this is something that Bruce Hales is encouraging people to do. If he sees that someone is getting, a little close to the fringe, he gets in with their children and says, look, just make sure you've got control over the cash. So when he goes, we can make sure we can hang on to him.
Yeah.
So this is a one-off. This is a tactic. This is their MO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lance,
I don't know how much Nigel was worth, but I was worth millions. And of course, you try and work out in your mind what's happening, because Bruce Hales, with the title of the man of God and in control of the whole religion and the man we look up to, you expect him to absolutely reflect the features of Christ. You've got to have moral qualifications to take a title like that. It can't just be that you're born into a position or you're the son of the previous leader. Cannot be. So you right until after I was shut up, I believe that he got wrong information, that Garth and others had got it wrong and were telling him that I was a bad man, but he would eventually get the right information. That's why I wrote letters to him, inside and out, and to Dean, his son, so that he would get the right information so that he could make a right judgment based on truth and facts. But then I found myself out and suddenly realised that he was complicit in the whole thing anyway. And then, of course, the scales fall from your eyes and you're beginning to see that you've been completely had. Oh. I mean, anyway, I'm not going to labour that point because it'll all come out in the courts. I mean, this court case was a great start, but there'll be a lot more. I'm sure there'll be further investigations and the truth will come out. I'm perfectly restful that the truth will come out and that, the brethren, I'd advise the brethren to come to the truth based on facts sooner rather than later, because the more they go on trying to pretend everything's fine and dandy, the more ridiculous it looks.
I'm curious, Lance, if there is a first of all, I'd love to see a transcript of that court case. I don't know if you have it, but that would be wonderful. But is there an avenue in British law for you to be able to sue for legal costs?
I understand I'm going to get as much costs as you can get on a case brought by the Crown. Because, of course, they went to the police with their complaints, and the police then went to the Crown, and it would seem as though the brethren were taking legal advice as well. So when you've got the Crown, the brethren, the police, and lawyers ganged up against you, it's quite a formidable force, James, if you understand.
Yeah.
And to actually claw your way through that level of pressure on your mind and soul and everything, it's heroic what Richard's done, getting through all the terrible abuse he's been. David Wallace, and there are others. I mean, there's a guy called David Betcher at the moment in Kingston. I think he's probably moving from Mandeville to Kingston, Jamaica, but he can't afford even the fare. He's homeless. He moved from South Africa in 1999, well loved by the brethren. Lovely guy. You couldn't meet a nicer guy. I've opened a GoFundMe account for him because the guy's destitute. And he moved, like I was loyal to the brethren and devoted, he was the same. So he moved with the brethren from South Africa in 1999 he didn't want to go to the Caribbean, but he landed up in Kingston. And he married one of the Diali girls, lovely girl. And they were separated. He was shoved out of fellowship. And of course, the brethren don't look after people that they shove out. And so he's literally been clawing around for crumbs. And he wasn't even, for years, given proper citizenship I'm not even sure he's got it yet. Certainly some of the Dialis haven't. So the Brethren have got a massive duty, if they're relocating people from one continent to another, to look after them. So I put a GoFundMe out because his mother, who's in the Brethren in Australia, would like him to go over and care for him. So I think that the Brethren should be funding him up to the hilt. But because they're not, despite appeals, I've put a GoFundMe out. So he's a hero, is David Betts, because he's actually said to the Brethren priests, Lance isn't as bad as you're making out. They're saying, if you have anything to do with Lance Christie, we're not going to give you any money at all. Well, that's a threat if anything is. So,
did your
I'm
lawyer
going wider from the Brethren and see if we can get money in to help the guy to live, to start.
Did your lawyer, Lance, ever indicate to you why he thought these charges would even find their way into a criminal courtroom?
Why these charges found their way to?
Why did the Crown even press charges? Like, if you look at this case on paper, right? That
will all be investigated. It could have been that the Crown were under some sort of pressure from the police, but the police were I found the police, the guy P.C. Wilkin, who was interviewing me, I mean, despite the fact I thought it was a ridiculous charge of harassment, he was a decent enough chap. He was young. I think the case was too big for him, a bit like Josh and in the court, as I said earlier. I feel very, very sorry for young people who are thrust into difficult situations.
Well, I remember, no, absolutely. And just before you go on, because Richard, I mean, your case, there seems to be, in the UK at least, sounds pretty easy to press charges against people for things that seem, rather frivolous.
I was very surprised the case was taken up. I mean, the problem in the UK is mostly that there's no really good anti-slap legislation, which means it's very easy for a wealthy person who can afford it, or a wealthy cult, to just press frivolous civil cases against a person. Mm-hmm. But I was very surprised that public prosecution took this up, because the guys have got enough to do. I mean, why waste public time and money on a ridiculous dispute? Very, very surprised. I mean, it really does make you think that there's some graft or threat or something. I mean, it's not the police just do their duty and they write the reports. It's actually the next stage up where something has gone astray, because the public prosecutors shouldn't be wasting time and money on this kind of thing. It's a ridiculous case.
And Richard,
obviously wasn't going to succeed.
I counted up the number of police employees that were involved in my harassment case, just in the Leeds, West Yorkshire force alone. 40 different people, just on one guy, Lance Christie.
That's a very biblical
hundreds
number.
Of thousands of pounds of police money wasted. But I mean, if your house gets burgled and you actually need a policeman, it might be an hour or so before they turn up if they do. I mean, they've got enough to do looking after criminals without worrying about Bruce Hale's paranoia.
Yeah, and they have to be seen to be doing everything so right and proper. I wish the Brethren would apply those principles to themselves, because they should be right and proper if they're judging somebody. I mean,
good luck with that.
Fundamentally, Christianity, foundational principle of Christianity is forgiveness. So why bring matters to court? Let me quote something that Jim Taylor Jr. said in ministry. If the Brethren will look on their shelves, they can read it. I think the date was the 29th of April, 1961. I'll just check that out. 27th of April, 61. Jim Taylor Jr., leader of the day. 1 Corinthians 6 would forbid a lawsuit against another brother, whether he was under discipline or not, because he is still a brother. If there is criminality or fraud, you have to be free to report it to the authorities. So presumably the Brethren felt that I was a criminal, so had to report it to the authorities. But then Jim Taylor goes on, you don't pursue the brother through the courts. but you leave the authorities to do that. So it will be interesting to find out when this is looked into whether it was the authorities pursuing me through the courts. Were they the force behind the effort to criminalise me? If so, who? But I didn't see it in the police officer. I didn't think there was anything in his heart that was against me. In fact, after one of the interviews, we said to each other, well, who do I go to? Because one of the police came to me and said to me, it was very stern, if you do it again, we'll have you for harassment. I said, I don't get it. I said, what do you want me to do? Commit suicide? Because the pressure is immense. You feel terrible when the police come round to see you. So it does make the question, who force behind it?
Well, that's what I was just going to say. No, please. But that's what I was just going to say is that, so there's two things that come to mind. One thing is, if those 8 members can sue you for, or prosecute you criminally for harassment, but Richard can be almost kidnapped, nothing happened. That tells me something. And what it tells me, and I'm focusing on the UK right now because of your case, is that maybe this is where we see, or we don't see because it's in the shadows, the political connections shine through. Like, I don't know how a group who clearly has established political connections then doesn't use them in a case like yours. And I'm speculating. I'm just sort of saying stuff out loud. I'm not accusing anyone of anything.
No, well, first thing, you can understand police getting a little bit, as a boy, PC plod, and the policeman can get a little bit, get his notebook out and get you into trouble. So you kind of expect that a bit from police, and lawyers can be a bit fearsome too. But Christianity, religion, they're there to, if you're in trouble, they're there to help you and give you a helping hand. So you would never suspect that the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church would ever have anything other than the best for you in mind. But so you don't think, especially when you're in there, that there's ever any conspiracy, because you judge others by your own motives. I would never have deliberately harmed anyone in the Brethren. So of course you don't think anyone else would harm you. Whereas narcissists, on the other hand, they can't bear somebody to be better than them, so they impute their own shit on them. Do you get me? So, psychopaths the same. They cannot bear anyone to succeed, so they're very suppressive and destructive. And if you're in a relationship with a psychopath or a narcissist,
go on,
you've got one hell of a challenge on, and I would advise anyone who's in a relationship with anyone like that to get out quick.
Yes, I will heed your advice. I mean, they will heed your advice. Okay. Now, where do we go from here? We have to wrap soon, but I'm just curious. If Lance, you can tell me what is next. Like, how does this fight continue? Richard, you alluded to it earlier, so maybe we can start with Richard and then go to Lance about how this fight can be how this case can be sort of used as a stepping stone for the next fight. Like, whatever you can tell me, because I know that there's some stuff that goes on behind the scenes that we want to keep there. But, can you give us an idea of how this will sort of help the fight in the future?
Yeah, well, it's kind of drawn their teeth a bit, in the sense that this gives a precedent that proves their malice in a legal way, an irrefutable precedent that these people maliciously pursue former members, and indeed will put immense pressure to drag up witnesses to testify against them in a very, very dishonest way. And it really limits their options. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to come out. There's, as you well know, lots of stuff happening, lots of stuff proposed, and it's going to make it very difficult for the Brethren to refute the matters that are going to come out, because there's this legal precedent established in the court that, this is what they are. They're a nasty and malicious, narcissistic cult that will, go to any lengths to try and criminalize or prosecute anyone who criticizes them. including going to the extent of weaponizing people's own family members against them to lie in court to try and drag them down. So, yeah, it opens a lot of doors.
Lance, we'll give the last word to you, sir.
Well, I think the last word should be an appeal to all to turn to Christ and look up scriptures. I mean, there's a wonderful scripture that was brought to my attention yesterday, Micah 6, verse 8. He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So that I used to love that scripture, and there are other scriptures in the Bible. It's just so beautiful that you just hang on to them. And you know, the light might be painful, the light of truth, but you see, Pilate asked Jesus, and your kangaroo court document, Richard, came up in court. I mean, it's a masterpiece and well done. And I wrote to all the brethren in Leeds, including Richard Marsh's kangaroo court document, which, you know, includes basic matters, which I think I've got it here somewhere, but I don't. In fact, you might publish it, Richard. But fundamentally, it's the defendant can present his case at a trial. Witnesses should be available. And there's a brother, this is another David. I'll just turn aside because I love the brethren. I see good in them. But there's a wonderful brother called David Smith of Sheffield. Bruce House had Sheffield closed down, so he's now in Chesterfield. But the time of Boston and thereafter, when I was being told that I didn't understand witness, he made it very clear that every matter needs to be established in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. This is just privately on the phone, which was going counter to what Garth and Roger Edwards and Chris Stutterheim and Priest were saying to me. So he kept me sane. So witnesses are very, very important. You don't bring matters to court. You don't say that someone's harassing you unless you can witness it. And when these guys were questioned, they couldn't find anything offensive in what I'd said. So under the cosh, there was no witness. And then the next point that Richard raised, respect of persons. You never have respect of persons in judgment. You've got to be fair and equitable. The next point, charges must be specific and defensible. So you can establish what the charges are beyond doubt. Well, that was violated in my case. It was violated in my case when I was brought before the Assembly in January 2015 and rebuked. Despite an elder in Leeds called Dudley Clayton saying, we must accept witness, brethren. Well, I was the accused and there was no witness. But when he says that, all the brethren think, oh, it must be witness. But there was no facts, and they don't talk about the fact in the Assembly. But the brethren all say amen and all that stuff. Advocacy. Hey, we're sticking up for David Wallace today. That's right. We're advocating for him. Absolutely right. We're advocating for David Betzer because these guys are in trouble. That's exactly what advocates do. And the right to self-defense and no predetermined outcome. I mean, if it comes out that there was a predetermined outcome by somebody to turn me into a criminal, that would be very serious, surely. So just to finish off, Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? Truth was put on trial and judged. Jesus set out the truth. But he was judged by people who were devoted to lies. Get that? Jesus was judged by people who were devoted to telling lies. So the truth had to be arrested falsely. Get that? Get that?
They called false witnesses against him, didn't they?
Exactly.
Which is what they did with you and me.
Yes. And so Pilate had the decency, or the honesty, shall we say, but he was in a system. He had the honesty to go to the Jews and say, I find no fault whatsoever in this man.
Is that the part where he said, I wash my hands of the blood of this innocent man?
Exactly. Well, so if anyone is convicted by that reaction to the truth being presented by Jesus, they may realize that they'll be supported by Christ and divine persons if they fearlessly make a stand for the truth now. And that is what is needed, regardless of the power of the system you're in. Stand for truth. That's what you've counted. And very simply, the message of the glad tidings is to repent and believe in the glad tidings. So if you repent and believe in God, he'll stand by you because you're entrusting himself to you. And I believe that fully. I'll stand by that. I'm going to continue trusting my God and I'm not condemning people that don't hold Christianity and Christ in the same way as I do. No, it's not my job. Not my job. My job is to forgive and understand and be empathetic and to people that haven't found Christ, because I might have been born a Muslim, so I might have come up a different way, and I might have been judged now by Christians as going to hell if I'd been born a Muslim. So it's not right to despise people and wipe millions of people off as heading for hell. I just don't get it. I think religion got out of its remit. Christ never intended people to be judgmental and go around judging others. He intended us to go around and preach Christ and attract people to Christ, not because we're frightening them and scaring that they're going to hell. No, just because we love Christ ourselves and we're radiating the glad tidings, and God's towards all men. That's the glad tidings. Sorry, I've probably gone on too long.
Hey, a 9-minute last word is totally normal. It's all good. I'm just kidding. No, listen. I've talked about belief and faith and stuff over and over again over the last little while with people who believe, and my message is always the same. I know that you're a good person. You believe it. You can believe in whatever you want, and I know you're a sinner too, right? But I know that you're a good person.
Stop a minute. I'm going to say one thing. The rich ruler came up to Christ, and said, "Good teacher." You know what Christ said to him? There is none good but God. And he was searching his motives out because he loved money. He was searching his motives out by coming up and saying, "Good teacher." There is one good, not so. Don't you call me a good person, okay?
All right, you're all right. You seem okay. But my greater point though is that I used to be more of a fierce critic, and I'm still a fierce critic of religion. However, only when people are doing are sort of exalting their God in a way that I find offensive. I don't find anything that you're saying offensive. I don't think I believe everyone should believe whatever that makes them happy and whatever makes them productive citizens and good people. So I have no problem with anything that you said today. I may not share the belief, but I have it on good authority that if I'm wrong about Jesus, all of this help that I'm doing with the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church ex-members, I'll probably just get a guest pass when I get to heaven. Like they'll just give me one, you know? So
well,
I'll be fine.
I've deliberately mentioned 3 Davids today who are living today because they're all so different. One of them's a black man, and David Betts is a black man, and lovely man. And David Smith's one of the brethren. David Wallace is a political fixer. So what? It doesn't matter what religion you're in. The Jews, the judge was a Jew. Meyerson, my barrister, was a Jew. Doesn't matter. They're good people. I call them good. And they're standing for justice.
Lance, you're British. You're British.
You could do
you're
that.
still good.
You could do that. You can do that whatever situation you're in. You can stand for what's right and risk your neck because you love people and you're prepared to sacrifice your own safety for the safety of others. And that's what Christ did. That's Christ-like. Sorry, I'm going on too much.
No, please. But we appreciate having you on. I would love to see if we could talk to you and your barrister one of these days, if that's ever a possibility.
Well,
because it'd be interesting to get sort of the legal lens of this.
Yes. Well, I've developed a very deep respect for him during this case. Yeah. And I think he has for me. And so I'm quite sure that we'll be doing lots of good things together. So you're right to ask. I think if you give us till at the end of February, I should have my new charity open by then called Free Indeed, which is actually to provide counselling, legal counselling, care, emotionally, psychologically for leavers of cults. So that there's a support system, because when you're pushed out and you come in a completely strange world that's been judged by the brethren all your life, you feel like a cat in headlights. You just don't know which way to turn. It's shocking. It's emotionally destroying. And so I've identified all that I needed, I think, at that time, and I put it all down in writing and set you up a charity. And I trust that there will be many leavers who've got good hearts and want the best for many who might contact me and want to perhaps you can open up a locality in various places in North America for this charity. Right? I'm not going to do anything to rival Plymouth Brethren Church. I'm not into rivalry at all.
Okay. Mr. Lance Christie, fresh off of his court victory in Leeds, acquitted for harassment charges that were leveled against him by the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll talk later today. I'll give you a shout, okay?
Cheers. Thank you. All the best.
Thanks, Lance. Thank you very much. Richard, thank you for joining us again. Wow, you give the last word to Lance, and that's it. You might as well
he didn't notice that word was singular, did he?
No, he didn't. Bye. I can't believe I got admonished for calling someone good.
Yes.
But you know what? He's a character. And not only is he a character, but you can tell that he's such a good guy. Like, he's a good person. And, one of the common threads among you guys that come out of that cult is that you all seem like very good people. So that was interesting having them on. Thank you for joining us as well. I'm sorry that you had to sit there in silence while our minister took the pulpit, but
it's a familiar feeling.
Yeah. Richard Marsh, thank you very much, buddy. I'll call you later today as well.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye-bye. Guys, please don't forget, look down at the bottom of the screen, David Wallace's GoFundMe page, which is gofund.me/A8615B9C. That's gofund.me/A8615B9C. As you heard from Lance Christie, who was just acquitted in his criminal case in the United Kingdom, as you heard from Richard Marsh, who was nearly allegedly kidnapped by the PBCC, and David Wallace found his red line, wouldn't cross it, blew the whistle, and now he is hung out to dry. Jesse Brown, I'm going to take the last couple of moments of this podcast to address Jesse Brown. Jesse Brown, you're a good content creator. I'll give you that. You're a decent journalist. I'll give you that. You're a decent interview as well. I have no problem with you professionally for the most part. Personally, let's be honest, I've never met you. I've talked to you on the phone a bunch of times, and that's about it. I really believe that you should reconsider not absorbing David Wallace into your legal defense. You guys are being both sued by the same people for the same amount of money for the same thing. Ratfucker, if I'm not mistaken, once again, it was the most downloaded pod series of 2022. Ratfucker exists because of David Wallace. You were fighting the lawsuit claiming that the information contained in your podcast series is factual. That information came from one source mainly, David Wallace. You need to act like a media outlet protecting its source. You need to make David Wallace part of your defense and give him your lawyer and make sure he doesn't pay for it. Absorb him. I find it troubling that you haven't already done this. I don't know why you would do this, especially since you are essentially defending the exact information that David Wallace supplied you with. So it doesn't make any sense to me. So that is my appeal to Jesse Brown. Again, David Wallace's GoFundMe page is gofund.me/A8615B9C. Even if it's just $5, guys, just chip in what you can. David needs legal representation in like 48 hours, or he's going to default on this because that's his deadline. So we're going to see if we can get another podcast going today with David Wallace. And until then, we will see you next time on Black Bolt.
Black Bolt. Black Bolt. Black Bolt. Black Bolt. Black Bolt.